Welcome to the Boswell Book Company virtual event series. Today is 4255 of us being in business. We have a very special pre-Thanksgiving gathering featuring Denise Kiernan, author of The Girls of Atomic City, and she'll be taking where she is straight from her kitchen. Today she'll be in conversation with, as we like to say, her sometimes collaborator and always husband, Joseph Denise. Denise Kiernan is a journalist, producer, and author also of The Last Castle, which, as many of you, hopefully some of you remember, was a wonderful event that we did at the Pabst Mansion. Yeah. The Last Castle was a finalist for the Thomas Wolfe Memorial Literary Award and the Southern Book Prize. She has also been a featured guest on numerous shows, including Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Joseph Denise is a journalist, author, and editor who's written books for kids and adults and been in publications as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Discover. Has won educational press awards and has been featured in Best American Science Writing. What a pair. Thank you very much, Denise, who's now disappeared. Oh, she's back.
I'm back. I had to get my tissues. It's that time of year.
Absolutely. Okay. Welcome. A virtual hand clap to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, it's so good. It's always so good to be with Boswell.
And also Samuel Johnson. But I'm pumped. Okay, never mind. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Joe.
This call is coming from inside the house.
Ooh. What was the name of that creepy movie? When a stranger calls?
There might be babysitters involved. I don't know. Do you want to tell us we're gathered? The name of your book is called We Gather Together, which suggests Thanksgiving, which is why we're in your kitchen. Do you want to tell us what you're working on today for tomorrow?
I am. I'm working on my favorite cranberry sauce, which is a spicy Zinfandel cranberry sauce. So I have my cranberries, and 59% of the nation's cranberries come from Wisconsin. Who knew? Just learned that.
I did not know. I figured it was Massachusetts 100%.
There's also Zinfandel in the spicy Zinfandel cranberry sauce, and most of it goes into the cranberry sauce. Not all of it.
Okay.
There's a theme. There's a theme to So Zinfandel cranberry sauce. There is a Pernod goes into my sausage fennel stuffing.
Pernod, what does that taste like? What?
It tastes a little like anise, actually.
Anise,
popular with the French. Then when I make my turkey gravy, I deglaze the pan with Madeira. So do you sense a theme?
Yeah, the theme is I won't remember Thanksgiving. So if you want to know what
sip and cook, and I got I want to give a shout out to Penzeys, where I get my spices. I love Penzeys. They make amazing spices. They have for many, 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 many years. And they do lovely, heartwarming things and have a beautiful, gratitude-filled blog, which speaks to me personally. And their spices are delicious. And I'm a big fan of Penzeys. So didn't plan to kind of, brought to you by Penzeys. I'm just going to go ahead and say that.
Okay.
I'm going to cheer. I have their allspice too. Yeah.
All right. You're not making this while we're talking though, right?
Well, no, I'm fiddling around. I'll probably, if I fiddle with anything first, it'll probably be the Zinfandel, honestly. So,
just so to mention what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have an axe. And it's razor sharp, and I will be at this event ends at 4:00. Hopefully at 4:15, I will be in the backyard looking for that family of wild turkey that is outside. If I can't get them with the axe, we may be eating.
I think they should be pardoned, like Tad Lincoln's pet turkey Jack. How's that for a segue to the book?
Okay, so let's start with just give us a capsule description. What is this book about?
Oh yeah, that's always so easy. You've read it. What do you think the book is about? The book is essentially the biography of an idea and a way to kind of look at the American experience over time through the lens of our relationship to tradition surrounding giving thanks.
Okay.
So it's, we take, I think that gratitude and ceremonies surrounding giving thanks and thankfulness, those have been on the planet as long as humans have been on the planet. And, gratitude is this ageless, timeless concept that for me was the linchpin that made me decide I actually wanted to do this book, because, you got to take some time when you decide what kind of books you want to do, because they're in your life for a long time. And they have to keep you interested, and you have to feel like there's something there for you to not only pursue while you're writing it, but to share when you're promoting it, and to keep on your shelf ideally for a while.
So in the book, you make a distinction between what we call the small T Thanksgiving and big T Thanksgiving.
Right.
So before we get into this, I want you to just sort of describe what they mean.
So the concept of Thanksgiving ceremonies, as well as the actual word Thanksgiving and the word Thanksgiving in the English language, go back hundreds and hundreds of years before newcomers landed on this continent. And a lot of those ceremonies were for a variety of reasons. You might have a Thanksgiving proclaimed by a civic leader for a battle that was won. You might have a solemn fasting Thanksgiving proclaimed by a religious leader for a specific event. There were also harvest festivals. Go back. I start the book. I talk about ancient Rome initially. You have harvest festivals, which are not the same as an officially proclaimed Thanksgiving, but very similar, centered around taking time to give thanks for something. And over time, all of these things, secular Thanksgivings, religious Thanksgivings, harvest festivals, all of those things began to conflate. And then eventually, honestly, much more recently, you have the concept of the American Thanksgiving, which we have had every year in November since 1863, although there were Thanksgivings in America before then. Yeah.
But you personally have an attachment, a fixation on Thanksgiving. Do you want to tell people about, you mentioned two stories in the book that I want to touch on, because they're wonderful openings about why Americans in general are so in love with Thanksgiving. You were living abroad twice in your life. What were those Thanksgivings like that you tried to pull together?
One of the things, Rome is in this book a bit, and we touch on Paris as well. So one of the things I've found as an American living abroad is you often feel most American when you're not in America. And it was just so funny to me that, the end of November would roll around and I'd be thinking, my gosh, we have to have Thanksgiving. We can't not have Thanksgiving because, I've had it every November as long as I've been alive. Well, the rest of the country doesn't really shut down for that. Although they'll shut down for lots of, in the middle of the day and in August. But, 1 year in Rome, I'm doing my cranberries because I love cranberry sauce, and couldn't find cranberries. It's not an easy thing. It was not when I lived in Rome. It was not an easy thing to find. I don't need to tell you how long ago that was. And so you go on this mission, talking to people in the expat community or people who had connections at the commissary at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, trying to get our hands on cranberries. And the whole time I'm just thinking, why does this matter to me so much? Then another Thanksgiving, a few of us descended upon a French friend's Parisian apartment. We went scouring the city for turkeys. Found one. Most of the feathers were plucked.
I was gonna say, did they have feathers?
Yes, but most of them were gone. We got rid of the rest. I was convinced this was the smallest turkey I had ever seen. But in fact, when we got back to my friend's apartment, we could not get the oven door to shut. So we're trying to cook. Turkeys take long enough as it is. Trying to cook one
Right.
when the oven door is, cracked like this. But these are all, I mean, and that's the thing I've always loved about Thanksgiving was it is not in this day and age associated with any specific religion. It's not associated with the need to buy presents for people.
Right.
It really is, a weekend to hang out and cook and eat and say thank you and be with friends and family. But I did want, there's also a lot of complicated modern interpretation and history that goes along with Thanksgiving that A, isn't accurate, and B, is not
Okay.
really necessarily respectful of the essence of the holiday. So I just kind of wanted to look at how we got from small T Thanksgivings that happened all over the world and at many different times of the year to the big T Thanksgiving that we all think of today, and kind of look at how that has evolved over time. And, at the heart of that story of coming together is a time when we were at our most divided during the Civil War.
At the center of this book, there is, if we can say a protagonist, a woman who is not terribly famous among most Americans. Most Americans have no idea who she is. You want to name her and tell us a little bit about her?
So her name is Sarah Josepha Hale, and this was a 19th century woman, grew up in the early 19th century, widowed mother of 5, no formal education, who became one of the most influential magazine editors of the 19th century. That in and of itself to me was very, very interesting. She also campaigned her entire life for the creation of a singular day of thanks, a national day of thanks that would happen the same time every year throughout the entire country.
All the states together on the same day.
All the states, the territories, Americans living abroad, all Americans all over the earth. She wanted everybody to celebrate Thanksgiving on the same day at the last Thursday of November. That is what she wanted. And when I came across this story years ago, I was working on something else, and I don't really she is a protagonist of about a third of the book and certainly a driving force of it. But this is not a biography. I don't really write biographies. So I knew I didn't want to do a biography of Sarah Josepha Hale, but I was interested in her relationship to the development of this holiday, the establishment of it on a national level, taking it from what it was and bringing it into a new phase. But sometimes when I'm writing, I find it more interesting to look at the intersection of events and characters more so than the actual individual characters and events themselves. So right. Hale and the Civil War and Lincoln, that was a very interesting intersection to me.
Okay.
But the missing piece for me was gratitude. And I've been thinking a lot about how all of this, the harvest festivals, the small T Thanksgivings, our Thanksgiving, the essence of all of this, there are so many different kinds of, essentially gratitude traditions and rites that have existed forever. And that to me was kind of the linchpin for wanting to tell this story and finding a way to tell this story, because especially as you come into the 21st century, which We Gathered Together does, there is so much interesting research into the practice of gratitude and the mental, emotional, and physical benefits of doing that. Really like hard neurological research about the effect it can have on your resilience, on your brain, all those sorts of things. So those elements all came together to make me want to kind of focus this giving thanks lens on the American experience.
So is it fair to say that Thanksgiving is not solely an American tradition? It was not invented.
No, we did not invent Thanksgiving. No. nor was
Okay.
it invented on this continent.
Right.
But the
Okay.
concept of ceremonies and rites and traditions surrounding giving thanks were on this continent, because indigenous peoples were on this continent, and they had their own ceremonies for giving thanks.
Right.
And other continents, other peoples had their ceremonies for giving thanks.
All right. So what? Yeah.
But even the word Thanksgiving, predates, the colonies.
I wanted to delve a little bit more into Sarah Hale. The things that I knew about her, and then when I read your book, what surprised me, even though I had known a little bit about what you were working on, there were things that surprised me.
Were you spying?
No, I'm not. I'm just telling you what
Looking at my notes?
No, not right now. No, not at all. Things, I mean, I have heard her described as a cross between Martha Stewart and Oprah Winfrey.
Yes.
All right, in the sense that she created American culture. She brought things to the attention of millions of people at one time. Here are some of the things that she, through the power of her magazine or magazines, created in our culture. She promoted the Christmas tree for the first time in America. She promoted the idea that brides should wear white wedding dresses when they got married.
Both of those things are related to her fascination with Queen Victoria.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And she was the author, can't even freaking believe this. She was the author of a little thing called Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Mary's Lamb originally, yes. Mary's
Lamb. Okay. All right.
But it is really caught on.
Yeah, sure, I would say
very
so.
Very popular with the kids. Yeah.
With the kids, and with anyone who's trying to learn a musical instrument for the first time ever. That and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. She introduced women to a fascinating French word. Do you want to tell us what that word is?
Lingerie.
Lingerie.
Yeah.
So American women had never heard of lingerie before she brought it to their attention. And yet she had this gigantic pulpit, but she was not at all interested in the thing that 19th century women were fascinated with, the idea of getting the right to vote. Can you tell us why she did not support suffrage for women?
Well, I mean, short of time traveling and sitting down with her and asking her personally, I can only extrapolate from her own experience and her own writings. What was interesting to me about Hale and the way you describe her, I mean, if we dropped her into the 21st century, she'd be, an influencer. She'd have 1 million Instagram followers, and she'd be, in her magazine, she told people, how their children should exercise, gave recipes, gave musical sheet music for things you could play with your family at home, told people what to read. And promoted various causes. And one of the causes dear to her heart was women's education. And I think this grew out of her own lack of a formal education and how hungry she was for knowledge, which is why she devoured books and became so well read and such a good writer.
Right.
So she had this, she did not have a vote, right? But she created this incredibly strong, influential voice. Nevertheless, now she was extremely clear, especially in the magazine, about how important she thought women having a right to a fair education was.
Right.
She would also raise money for the widows and abandoned families of men who were lost at sea. She had an older brother who was lost at sea.
Right.
And she also, she wrote about the rights of married women, and she thought it was, her magazine, they wrote about it, and she said, it was atrocious that, a woman who would have had, rights to property and money to a certain extent before she was married, lost the rights to those the minute she got married. So in her own way, she was advocating for these things that were important to the women's movement, but she did not get involved with the suffrage movement.
Right,
Now,
right.
she could have used her pulpit to just, talk about women getting to vote, how important it was. She could have attended, like the convention in Seneca and given speeches and all of those sorts of things. But why she didn't, she wrote about like that was not where she was going to put her energy in that particular, in a very active way in that movement, even though all the work she did for women's education and supporting and extolling the achievements of like Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first woman in America to get a medical degree, covering Florence Nightingale's nursing book and saying it was better than, anything, any man had written, and that women should be allowed to go to medical school, and this nonsense that men are uncomfortable having women in medical school is ridiculous. So in a way, like the things she was saying were incredibly progressive. I think the reason she stopped short of all that is I think she saw the ability to exert her influence the way that she did in the pages in her magazine and the articles she wrote, because she did watch other, fellow editors and writers who were more outspoken on women's rights, in the abolition movement, lose their jobs, lose their incomes. I think, and again, this is me just extrapolating, I think that is one of the reasons, perhaps, that she didn't go any further, but she nevertheless, in her own way, had an incredible impact on women's education and women's voices, especially as writers. She anthologized them, she shared their works. And I think she had her impact in her own way.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the middle of the 19th century, anyone who was contributing to the growth of American literature, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Harriet Beecher Stowe in the 1850s, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was probably the first bestseller ever in the United States. She published them all. Of the 19th century. She published them all. She had a correspondence with all of these people, including some rather unusual authors. I thought I would give you a chance to tell that story.
Well, there again, I was talking before about intersections of people and events and stories, and she, someone who was interviewing me the other day said, so she's the Forrest Gump of the 19th century. And I was like, she kind of is the Forrest Gump of the 19th century.
Forrest Gump.
That's what she said, or that, or the whatever. And
the Zelig.
Yeah. So when she began editing this, the ladies magazine, she wanted them to have only original writing, which wasn't always the case in the early to mid 19th century. She wanted to make sure they had new voices, voices of women, voices of unsung writers, etc. So this one young writer, sends in work. She decides to publish it in the magazine. And the magazine described this writer's work as, boyish and feeble in certain ways, but also showing signs of genius, and that this writer could become, no less a poet than Shelley if he went in that direction. So turns out this writer went to West Point with Hale's son David. And so after this citation in the magazine comes out, David writes his mother from West Point and says, I shared your magazine's review with my classmate Edgar Allan Poe. And this begins the relationship between Sarah Josepha Hale and Edgar Allan Poe, a relationship that would last through the end of Poe's life. In fact, his last, Malona Tata, his last story was published in Godey's Ladies magazine. He published many things in there. She was close with him and with his family. And he also, the Cask of Amontillado was published in that magazine as well. And that always kind of cracks me up, because I just imagine, these women sitting in their 19th century women sitting in their parlor, looking at fashion plates and learning about lingerie and seeing, you know, dress patterns and recipes.
Music.
And somebody's getting walled up in a crypt, you know.
Yeah, sure.
It's to me, it just seemed so so amazing. But she did, I mean, names that we take for granted today, like Irving, Hawthorne, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Longfellow, John Quincy Adams, and Poe, certainly, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. You know, I mean, these were all people that she had published at different times in her magazine. Most, you know, many of them before they became what they are today, which are household names.
Okay, so, but in addition to her editorial duties, she's constantly writing letters. And she has these different causes for different organizations.
And writing
She's
her own
trying to
book.
raise, yeah, and writing her own books and anthologizing other people's books.
Yep.
Great. But somewhere in there, she starts writing presidents of the United States. And I think she writes, I think it's Taylor or Tyler. Who's first? Zachary Taylor?
Zachary Taylor. It's yeah, Taylor, Pierce, Fillmore, Buchanan. Yeah.
And then one day, what happens? One of her letters ends up on the desk of probably our greatest president. You know, historically, we keep coming back to Abraham Lincoln. Can you tell us that story and just how that ends up becoming her, making her dream come true?
So she had this campaign that she wanted there to be one national day of thanks for all Americans everywhere in the country and other parts of the world. She wrote about it in her novel. She wrote about it in her magazine, Nonstop. She wrote governors. She wrote the heads of territories. She wrote ambassadors in other countries, trying to get them on board with this idea. And states, you know, year after year, certain states would get on board. And she would write about that in the magazine. You know, Ohio has joined us again this year. You know, the last Thursday in November will be a National Thanksgiving Day. We only need, you know, Congress or the president to make this an official thing. And, you know, Taylor, Buchanan, Fillmore, and Pierce, Fillmore, Pierce, that didn't happen with them. When she wrote Lincoln, I think she wisely also chose to write William Henry Seward and his Secretary of State. And Seward goes into, in his autobiography, said he went into Lincoln's office and said, you know, these states are saying we're taking away their rights. Let's take away another one, the right to proclaim Thanksgiving Day. So it was, and you know, in the middle of the Civil War, I mean, you want to talk about of all the presidents she wrote, the one who really had a lot of other things going on, Lincoln does it. He does it. And in fact, it was the same, the proclamation, you know, came in October, and that Thanksgiving in 1863 was November 26th, which is what it's going to be again this year, November 26th.
Right. And
that was really the beginning. And she knew without an act of Congress that this holiday would always be left to the president proclaiming it and the governors of different states and territories, heads of territories, following suit. She never saw an act of Congress in her lifetime, and she kept writing presidents all the way up through her death.
So actually, just to backtrack a little bit, George Washington did declare Thanksgiving. John Adams did as well.
George Washington declared, was actually the first president of the United States to declare a national day of thanks. And he did it the last Thursday of November, which was one of the reasons Hale's, you know, like that day. Hale's father had been a veteran of the Revolutionary War. He had been injured during the Revolutionary War. And, you know, she had lived through all of those presidents from Washington forward. Adams proclaimed a national day of Thanksgiving. It wasn't the end of November. He also proclaimed, he tweaked it as was the custom, and it was a national day of fasting and humiliation, which doesn't sound as celebratory.
That doesn't sound fun at all. Were there turkeys involved? I wonder.
That was very common. There's some really wonderful archival research from the Adams family, including their diaries, and his son and grandson had some things to say about the practice.
Not Morticia Adams.
Not that one, no, not Tuesday.
No, a different
although
Adams.
the Adams family has a spectacular Thanksgiving, Adams family too has a spectacular Thanksgiving scene.
Right.
So, and then Jefferson refused to proclaim a national day of Thanksgiving because so many Thanksgivings were back then were religious in nature, and Jefferson was big on the separation of church and state. So I get into that there too. And then it wasn't, so this end of November Thanksgiving throughout the country did not catch on and did not become an annual recurrence until Lincoln.
Okay, so obviously the Civil War is going on. Do we know how Lincoln and his family celebrated that first Thanksgiving that he declared? Do we know how soldiers in the field?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Lincoln was sick. And I get into that a little bit in the book. So he was actually, he was on his way back from, he had delivered the Gettysburg Address right before, a week before Thanksgiving. And he took ill and was ill, into December. So he personally did not have a very celebratory 1863 Thanksgiving. Some amazing things, went on. I mean, some people, there were celebrations in the field. There were contests. There are some, notes from Confederate newspapers that say, they would have reports from the field, and our enemy is celebrating Thanksgiving, and so we are all quiet. So that was really interesting. One of my favorite stories is that Sojourner Truth went door to door raising money so that troops bivouacked outside Detroit could have a Thanksgiving meal. So there were some really, and one of the things I like about, the book, and it goes, into the 20th and 21st century, is looking at all these different Thanksgivings, especially the ones that took place during very difficult times, and watching how people still manage to not only celebrate, but also help others celebrate.
Right. So if it is true then to say that in all her letters to all these presidents, to all these people, she never referenced the thing that we consider to be the first Thanksgiving, the 1621 encounter.
No.
Lincoln never mentions it either in his documents. Can you tell us anything, shed any light about how much of that story is true? I know you debunk some of it in the book.
Yeah, and I'm not the first person to point out that the 1621 tale that we were told as kids is fairly fanciful. Were there pilgrims in Plymouth in 1621? Yes. Did they have a hard winter? Yes. Was there a meal with the Wampanoag Indians? Yes. That's it, pretty much. Was a Thanksgiving proclaimed for that event? No. Is there any evidence the Wampanoag Indians were were formally invited to that to feast with them? No. And it was common had there been other Thanksgivings or similar events in North America prior to that? Yes. So, and so that was the other thing, is that, when Hale decides to wants to make this an annual event, she's not writing to commemorate any specific thing that happened.
Right.
She just, Thanksgivings and harvest festivals, secular events, religious events, those again had been around for a very long time. And there were a lot of traditions surrounding them, especially in New England, where, the Pilgrim Puritan influence was very strong. But as far as like commemorating some specific event, no, that has nothing to do with it. And then, you combine that with everything that went on, all the hardship and suffering that the indigenous peoples of this country endured when the newcomers arrived. We don't need that story anymore.
Right. Your book is pretty good about telling us not only the story of the indigenous peoples in the 17th century, but all the way up until 1970,
Mhm.
when we are starting to see the beginning of the Red Power movement, the Black Power movement. Can you give us like a sense of like what was going on then? Because I feel like that seemed new to me, even though I was alive during that time.
So no, no, certainly. So I mean, the '60s were there. There was tremendous amount of social activism. Um, a lot of populations in the United States were frustrated that they were not seeing themselves fairly and justly represented in textbooks, in advertising, et cetera, et cetera. Malcolm X said famously, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock was landed on us. And and in 1970, that's when um, Thanksgiving became a national day of mourning, for Native Americans. There were protests at Plymouth. There were also some glimmers, though, of people trying to draw attention to this. In 1972, there was a Thanksgiving protest at Plymouth. The flag of the Wampanoag people flew over the capital of the United States of America. And the following year, that very same flag was presented in Plymouth by a descendant of the Pilgrims to the acting chief of the Wampanoag. And this descendant of the Pilgrims basically said, we've all taken way too long to recognize, the contributions of your people. And I wouldn't be here if the Wampanoag had not assisted
Right.
the Pilgrims when they came over. So it was nice to come across moments like that too, in the midst of everything else that was going on. But again, and Thanksgiving during World War II and Thanksgiving during the Spanish flu, which feels really eerily.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go into that a little bit. What you tell this story, I don't know whether it's 1918, 1919, when the soldiers start coming back from World War I, and they're showing up in droves. People want to go to church. They want to get together with their family members, but there's this horrible flu that's killing people left and right. What was it like for you to write that?
Well, writing it was just writing history at the time. I mean, these books, when you write these books, you're conceiving of them and outlining them and doing rough drafts and tweaking them and all those things. They're in your life for so long. But when we went back and were like doing, final edits and proofs and everything, the world had changed a lot. And reading the Spanish flu Thanksgiving was very different in 2020 than it was when I, conceived of the book. It was very similar. People were tired of quarantining. People were tired of staying apart. A lot of public gatherings were canceled. Civic and health professionals were telling people, please don't have even large family gatherings.
So basically, history repeats itself.
I hope not. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. But but that aspect, yeah, the telling people don't. But people wanted to be together. And there was one newspaper article I came across in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can you tell us that story? Yeah.
Out of Ohio, that was one woman wanted to have just a family dinner, but family members were going to be coming who did not live in her house. And they were coming with their spouses. This wasn't like some big free-for-all kegger or something. It was just like a family dinner. And 27 people ended up ill because of that one dinner. And that was the headline. It was 27 ill because of Thanksgiving. And yeah, so you hope that. I mean, it's frustrating. I'm frustrated we don't get to do the usual stuff that we like to do at Thanksgiving. But
okay, so the cheesy stuff, that the president pardons a turkey. When did that start? Was that with George Washington, or who does that the first time?
So
we just had one yesterday.
Yeah, so Lincoln, it goes back to that. It goes back to the beginning. It goes back to Lincoln in 1863. they had, like I said, he was sick for Thanksgiving, but they had a turkey dinner planned for Christmas. And the turkey arrived and, was still alive. It hadn't been slaughtered yet. And his son, Tad, took a liking to this turkey and named the turkey Jack. And Tad did not want Jack to be dinner. So he actually asked his father, he was like, could we please, we can't eat Jack. And so Lincoln decided not to have Jack for dinner. And he actually wrote this in paper. So it was actually a written presidential pardon for Jack the turkey. And even the following year, when Lincoln was running for re-election the following year, Tad's still walking around with Jack the turkey. And
the turkey lived in the house with them?
Yeah, well, on the grounds. On
the ground. All right, whatever. Yeah.
Where it was. But there's a discussion about Lincoln seeing Tad walking around on, basically election day, and he said, "Is Jack gonna vote for me?" And Tad said, "He's not old enough."
He's not old enough. That's right.
So there are some sweet things in there in the book too. I think, overall, again, the whole gratitude piece and people finding a way to come together and find something, just find something to be thankful for in the midst of such horrible, trying times. I think that's a perennial message, but actually for me, it's just, I know I personally am really trying to, hone in on that myself personally this year.
What you mentioned earlier, the idea of the gratitude, hard science behind gratitude. Can you just give us like a brief summary of what that is about?
Well, in the last decade or so, there's just been a lot more research done into the effect of having a gratitude practice on the emotional, mental, and even physical well-being of individuals, down to like lowering blood pressure and reducing anxiety. And, there are practices and studies that, map the brain. There's neurological research. And, all of these different, tests look at the fact that, gratitude for you is different than what it is for me. What I'm thankful for, you might not be thankful for. You might be thankful for something else that is not a big deal to me. Just having gratitude, expressing it even to yourself, even if you don't say it aloud to somebody else, can be a very powerful thing. And again, they are studying the reactions of people, on a neurological level about these things. And,
Right.
And one of the other most interesting things that they also look at is the ability of individuals to find something to be thankful for and have gratitude when things are at their worst is a big contributor to the resilience of the human spirit. So
Right.
that to me was kind of a very interesting way to sort of bring the concept of Thanksgiving into the 21st century.
So if Sarah Hale were alive today, if Lincoln were alive today, and they saw the way that we celebrate Thanksgiving, maybe not this year, but previous years prior to this, what would they find strange?
Oh my God. Well, I think Hale and Lincoln would kind of scratch their heads at football games and doorbusters and maybe parades. But on the other hand, I think she would be delighted that there is still a lot of charitable activity that goes on this time of year. Giving Tuesday, there's a lot of focus on giving back and helping those who are not doing so great. And I think that is I think that is something that would feel really good to her and feel very familiar to her.
Right. Okay, I did want to give you some time. If there are any questions, people can leave them in the box to the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A box. Also the chat, if you feel more comfortable doing it that way. I thought I would give you time to talk about maybe your favorite tip for cooking anything We already heard the Zinfandel story, but you,
Well, I was lucky. There are a couple things. I was, one of my first events for this book, I was in conversation with Chef Rocco DiSpirito. And Rocco reminded people listening, and this is very important, a lot of people overcook their turkey. I mean, undercooking is obviously very bad and a health hazard, but a lot of people overcook their turkey and it gets very dry because they forget that the turkey will continue cooking, especially if it's
right after the
oil,
yeah.
once you take it out of the oven. So if you get a turkey that has one of those poppy things, by the time that goes up, your breast meat's going to be
You're
way
talking
too
about like the little like red thing
I
that
don't
pops up.
I don't get turkeys like that, so I don't know. But yeah, they have
Okay.
things that pop up when it's done.
Yeah, it might be yellow or red
If that
indicator.
pops up, it's past done. Because it'll come out, it'll sit under the tent. You're carving, you're waiting, and then things get very dry that way. And then I personally, I have in recent years become a big fan of putting my stuffing into big muffin tins. Because, you know, you can really pack the stuffing into those individual sections because there's no yeast. So it's not like it's going to rise and overflow, but it gets really lovely and crispy. And they look very nice. They look very nice on the plate. And the best part is they go in the fridge and then they keep really well. And then when you want leftovers, you just cut the muffin in half and you use that as bread for a turkey sandwich.
Okay, the stuff and muffin type
The stuff and
concept.
muffin sandwich.
There is a question. Yes. What kinds of Thanksgiving traditions have gone out of style?
So Thanksgiving traditions that have gone out of style in the 19th century and actually into the early 20th century, there was something called Thanksgiving masking. And on Thanksgiving Day, kids and adults would run around and have would run around with masks on of political figures or you know, monsters or whatever, and ask people on the streets for money or treats. And to the extent that there was this one hilarious article that I cite that was in the New York Times, this letter to the editor who said, when is this going to stop? You know, these hordes, I was approached, you know, 5 times today in a 6-block radius by, you know, these kids in masks asking me for money and candy. And it got so popular that a lot of stores would start putting masks and candy next to each other. I'm sure this all sounds very familiar. And so that actually, that leaves Thanksgiving, but does become a popular
component of
Halloween practice. As an American, celebrating Thanksgiving abroad can be a joyous and at times hilariously frustrating experience. I was living in Rome for the second time in my life, my first sojourn there coming right after college, when I found myself unable to leave, sucked into the sometimes dolce, often frustrating, but ultimately beguiling vita of the expat. This time I had returned on purpose and was freelancing. Many of my Roman and American friends were still living there, and many were familiar with the concept of American Thanksgiving. Now, while the city is charmingly notorious for shutting down in the middle of the day for siesta, it does not shut down for American holidays. And so celebrating the feast day that Italians refer to as Giorno del Ringraziamento, literally, Day of Thanks, often results in making do with dishes like salsa di mirtilli, which is blueberry sauce, or substituting ribes, currants, for that indispensable Thanksgiving staple, cranberries. The cranberry is called Mirtillo Rosso Americano in Italian, which means red American blueberry. They were, when I lived abroad in the early aughts, wickedly difficult to get your hands on in the Eternal City. If there is a Black Friday in America, there is Cranberry November in Rome. Throughout the city, expat Americans outmaneuver one another with the ferocity of razor-elbowed shoppers prowling big box stores and vying for the last available must-have du jour. They desperately seek out and barter for even the perma-ridged, sugar-soaked, elusive cans of pre-made cranberry sauce, the kind that exits its container with a phoot and a plop and sits on your plate, jiggling like a little crimson tube of jellied nostalgia. Thank God for connections at the United Nations and its expat-friendly commissary, Ocean Spray, my kingdom for some bog-raked ocean spray. And so that's a little bit from the introduction, where I speak in from personal experience before I shift back into the history of Thanksgiving, and then bring us forward again, and then bring some more personal experience in at the very end. So I bookend things.
Okay.
But goodness, it's almost 4 o'clock. We
Okay.
should.
We got to start pouring alcohol in various pots.
And in my glass. Hi, Daniel.
And we hope you have a wonderful and fun Thanksgiving.
Oh, you as well. Thank you so much.
Same to you,
love
Dan.
Boswell books. I just love you
Yes.
guys. Thank you so much.
Next year, and well, not next year, but next time.
Paperback, absolutely.
Maybe the Past Mansion, maybe someplace even more, whatever, because it really depends on what book you write.
That's right.
Are
I
you?
should start writing my books based on places in Milwaukee I want to have my event.
Yeah, that seems like a great opening. Are you working on your next book now?
I am.
We'll keep it a secret for the moment.
Yes.
But we'll be anxious. People will be writing to you and like, does it have to do with the zoo? Does it have to?
Right.
Is it Discovery World?
Is there beer?
Oh, then we have a couple of places for you.
Yeah, I am very, in keeping with the books, I am very grateful that everybody showed up the day before Thanksgiving to talk about history and gratitude and all that stuff. And thank you guys for keeping on going.
The thing about your book is it marks a particular day, but it is good all year long. And the lessons of gratitude can be any day. And of course, I learned after the book that the president or governor can call a Thanksgiving in February. So
that's
who
right.
knows?
And I think the next evolution of the holiday is, Thanksgiving. It's a state of mind. So we can have it whenever we want.
We will definitely need a small T Thanksgiving with a lot of fat, maybe a fasting one. I don't know.
And humiliation, Dan.
Fasting and humiliation. I will have to look up some reference books to see exactly
what
how
that
I
meant.
could ritually humiliate myself for a holiday.
But if it involves John Adams, I'm sure that there's always going to be humiliation.
I think that's the last word. Goodbye.
Okay.
Everyone.
All right. Goodbye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.